Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Let's see where it is. To give you a little background of our program, um, we started this many moons ago. I guess she said Catherine and I did, the Art at Noon, and it's now developed into a pretty big production for us. We have several different segments of the Art at Noon program. One is the Know Before You Go segment, which is what we're doing today. This is where we talk with people who make art in our community and in our nation and anywhere else that we can find them that make art. And we get information about their presentations and also how they create art. And we it just helps really enhance our experience when you go to plays, operas, symphonies, because we get kind of an insider look at what's going to happen. And I think we enjoy it better that way. The other thing that we do is we have a segment called Backstory, which we talk to authors who create, not only just books, but magazine articles, anything with the printed word. Anne McCutcheon, who is a celebrated author who did the latest biography of Margaret Kennan Rollins, was our guest, and was a wonderful backstory about Margaret Kennan Rollins. We also have under this umbrella our art walks, where we go. We have been everywhere from Florida to New York City to Washington, D.C., Philadelphia last year, Spires in the Sun tours with architecture. And along the way, we have been up close and personal to art. Next year is Boston. So we're going to be doing an art walk in Boston. So hopefully some of you will join us on that. And in October, we will kick off an art walk with Aspires in the Sun, another art walk so that with this beautiful book that we're selling from the bookstore. And then how we all started. We all started during COVID. Instead of, a lot of people said, well, we enjoy getting together to talk about books. Why don't we get together and talk about art? And this is really how it all started. And we started talking about a painter and everybody would bring their wine and their food and would sit around at 12 o'clock and talk about this painter and then discuss the work. So today is our Art at Noon, Know Before You Go series. And we are so delighted to have Courtney Lewis as our guest. Courtney, I asked him if he didn't mind. He's a Southerner now. He's been here now for 14 years. Okay. So he is now definitely fried chicken and everything, right? You know all about it. Okay. Courtney, just a little tiny bit of background before we hit the Requiem. Courtney was born in Belfast, Northern Ireland. He started out, according to the website, and Corey, you can jump in if I've got anything wrong, all right? He began his musical journey in the choir as a chorister, and then he started studying composition at the University of Cambridge. Clarinet was your instrument of choice, was that correct? Clarinet. Yep. Then he completed his master's degree at Cambridge with a focus on, how do you say the master, the late music of, is that
George, as in George that we all know, Ligeti. Ligeti, and he died that year. I was supposed to meet him in 2006, but he unfortunately died that year. Hungarian composer. We played some of his music here at the beginning before I figured out what works and what doesn't, and it's a little bit off the beaten track for Jacksonville. But it's wonderful, interesting, difficult modern music, which I love.
And you like the modern, as and I'll get to that in just a minute. So then you got over across the pond, maybe we're not the pond, but a big pond, to the United States. And that was in 2008, right around
2007.
Okay. And you became the Discovery Ensemble. What was that?
So I was the assistant conductor of the Boston Philharmonic. That was the main job for 2 years. But the second of those 2 years, I began a chamber music orchestra myself called Discovery Ensemble, which took the whole orchestra into parts of Boston that didn't have music programs in public schools. So we would write interactive workshops, and we would play in school gymnasiums for kids with no music programs. And it kept going until 2016. And at that point, I just couldn't funded anymore. Um, After 2 years in Boston, I went to Minneapolis for 5 years, where I was the associate conductor of the Minnesota Orchestra, and I was also an assistant conductor with the LA Phil in Los Angeles during those couple of years. And then in 2014, I had a very exciting year. In a couple of months, I got the job as the assistant conductor of the New York Philharmonic, and then also music director in Jacksonville. And I did those two jobs whilst living in New York for 2 years, and nearly overdid it. It was too much. So resigned from New York in 2015 and then moved here that year to devote myself full time to the Jacksonville Symphony, where I've been ever since.
And now he counts, not only does he count Jacksonville as his home, but he also counts, I hope, the Cathedral as his home as well, because he's a member here and we are so delighted. Okay, we're going to jump right in. All right.
Okay, that's
All
good.
right, here we go. As I said, I sent a list of questions to him, and he was so kind to say, to say they were okay. All right, first of all, we have a First Monday book club at the Cathedral, and our First Monday book club selection this month was Mozart's Starling.
Mhm.
And in this book, we were only given snippets of Mozart's life and his relationship to this singing pet starling that he had. In the book, Mozart was described as a musical genius, hospitable, generous, a workaholic, deeply engrossed in his musical pursuits. His humor, and there were some little excerpts from his letters, was often juvenile and very colorful, by the way. Okay.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, just as questions. Have you got any information about the pet starling? Because we were hoping you might know a little bit about that. And how would you describe Mozart and his work? And also, what composers do you think influenced him?
Oh, that's a
Yeah.
great question. I don't know much about the starling, but he did love animals. You've got to remember that Mozart, he was born in 1756 and he died in 1791, so a very, very short life. And when you consider how many pieces of music he wrote, the Requiem being the last published one, which is K626, that's the catalogs of the numbers of his pieces. He had to be writing pretty much all the time. We also know, however, that he was very childlike in his humor. He loved toilet humor, as you alluded to. Um, he loved his sister, with whom he traveled the world as a child with his father, who he spent his whole childhood traveling Europe as a kind of amazing genius child who was put in front of the dignitaries of a city and told to play with a cloth over the piano keys or with a blindfold, or asked to improvise on songs that the audience threw at him. He was completely brilliant. Um, Unfortunately, he was also extremely profligate. He spent like crazy and he was always broke. He had a steady stream of commissions his whole life, yet he never had any money because he spent so much money on wigs and powder for his wigs and fine frocks. And if I were at home, I could show you exactly what his wig looked like, because my father was a barrister and I actually have his wigs in a box, and they're exactly the same as the ones that Mozart would have worn, made of horsehair. So that actually ties into the Requiem, because we'll get there later, but one of the reasons why Constanza, his wife, his widow, was so keen that the Requiem be finished and published and passed off as Mozart's own work is that she was completely broke when he died. She didn't have any money. She had loads of kids to feed. She had absolutely no prospects, and that was a very frightening position to be in at that time as a widow. Um, so we know that he really enjoyed life, that he was great fun. He infuriated people with his talent. If any of you have seen the movie Amadeus, there's a lot about the Requiem in that movie, but we see how Salieri, who was the court composer in Salzburg and Vienna, was infuriated by Mozart's genius and the ease with which he wrote profound music. For example, when you look at his sketches, he never made any corrections, just like Bach. He didn't sit at a piece of paper and write down his ideas and scribble them out and change them. They were there, complete and finished, before he put pen to paper, and they just came out perfect the first time. So there are a few composers in the world who give such a sense of perfection, um, of ease and of profundity. And I think something that I find particularly brilliant about him is that he wrote very much for his audience. There were letters when he would berate fellow composers for making things too complex because he thought that music should be pleasing and agreeable to the listener. Now, we're so much in Beethoven's world where we think of music as being difficult and the artist as a kind of struggling person, that we're used to this romantic idea of art having to be difficult in order to be profound. But Mozart did not believe that at all. He thought that music should be agreeable and pleasing and graspable to the layman on a first hearing. And to be able to be profound, particularly at the level of the Requiem, but also accessible to everybody on a first hearing, is something that very, very few composers, even Bach and Beethoven, fail at. Um, and I think that that all stems back to the kind of person he was. He was exactly the kind of person who would have loved a little bird or enjoyed playing with his dogs and liked having a good time. But working, writing music nonstop. I don't think there's ever been a more perfect creation of a musician in history than Amadeus Mozart.
Okay, let's get into the religion background a little bit. We can talk and some questions about that. He was Catholic.
Mhm.
Okay. What was his relationship? I know his father was extremely devout. It's a very devout Catholic. But what was Mozart's relationship with the church?
Well, first of all, it's hard for us in his letters to get a sense of what his own personal faith was because everybody was a Catholic officially. It wasn't acceptable to not be Orthodox and not be part of the church. So it was taken for granted that you believed in God and that you had a personal faith. Um, his early years in Salzburg were completely in the employ of the church. So after he finished his touring with his father, so let's see, 1756, 66, 76. So by the early 1770s, when he was a late teenager in his early 20s, he'd stopped touring the world and was employed as the organist by the Archbishop of Salzburg at the cathedral. And if any of you have been to Salzburg, the cathedral is this stunning building about 2 blocks away from where Mozart was born. You can visit the house that he grew up in. Um, and there isn't much else to do in Salzburg except go to church. Mozart was very happy to leave because it just wasn't a whole lot to do. Um, but in his early years, everything he did was to do with the church. So there are lots of masses, lots of religious music, lots of motets and cantatas that were written for the Sunday's service. So it was music on demand that was expected of him each week. And he got into a lot of trouble with the Archbishop because when he'd been away as a child, the great advantage that that touring had given him is that he'd seen the musical styles of all of Europe. You've got to remember how provincial people's lives were. He could easily have been in Salzburg his whole childhood and have come across absolutely no music apart from the music that was played in Salzburg, and it was not a cosmopolitan place. But because he'd been a child prodigy and had toured Europe and had visited England and had played for the King of England and had met the Pope and met the Crown Prince of every duchy in all of Germany and Austria by the time he was a teenager. He'd been able to absorb this wide range of music, and that meant that he wanted to write it. And he was always getting trouble with the Archbishop because he wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing. He was writing concertos and symphonies and sonatas instead of masses and playing the church services. And it was actually that disagreement with the Archbishop um, close to the time that he was writing the Sinfonia Concertante, which is the first piece on this program, the concerto for violin and viola, that he got totally sick of the Archbishop and said, okay, goodbye, and left in a huff, resigned his position at the cathedral and moved to Vienna to be a freelance composer. So we know from the operas that there's hasn't really been another human being who's understood human psychology as brilliantly as Mozart. That's why he's the greatest opera composer that ever lived. But we also have in all his religious music a very deep level of understanding and meaning and profundity. And particularly in the Requiem, the way the text is set, the way the words of the Mass are actually written to music, shows deep, deep familiarity with them and a great sense of the cosmic drama between good and evil. A very powerful sense of another world in which forces are raging that we only see a tiny glimpse of. So if his music is anything to go by, which of course is the ultimate arbiter, he was a deeply religious and spiritual person.
Well, I'm going to kind of build on that one because do you think then that his religious beliefs shaped his musical compositions, including the Requiem? Do you
Oh
think
yeah,
that?
absolutely, no question. And one thing that's particularly important is that when Mozart was about 25, he encountered the music of Bach, of Johann Sebastian Bach, for the first time. And the moment that he encounters Bach is a revelation for him because once he hears what Bach is capable of doing, or in music, his own composition gets about 5,000% better, more interesting, more contrapuntal, deeper in every sense. And of course, the music that he came in contact with Bach was religious music because Bach spent his entire later career in Leipzig as the cantor at the St. Thomas Church, where he was writing a cantata for the service of the church every single week. Um, so I think that there's a very deep spirituality that infuses all the music. This concert is a wonderful kind of blend of sacred and profane because the first half, the Sinfonia Concertante, is absolutely humanist music. It's the kind of thing Mozart wanted to write that he couldn't when he was working for the Archbishop of Salzburg. And it's full of humanity and of human problems. But the Requiem is very much about God and human human inadequacy in the face of something indescribably bigger and greater than us. So the humanity in the Requiem is always a kind of pleading for mercy because of the understanding of complete inadequacy in the face of God's glory and love.
Well, and that leads me into this now. Thank you. Nice segue. Okay, I wanted to ask about, let's talk specifically about the Requiem just a little bit. It's a big thing in the history of sacred music.
Mhm.
Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, it's probably the most legendary and most mythologically talked about piece because of the circumstances under which it was written. So the kind of traditional story is that Mozart, who was already aware that he was very ill and probably dying, was visited by an anonymous person in the middle of the night, commissioning him for a requiem. Mozart was convinced that the requiem was in fact commissioned for his own funeral, wrote the piece knowing that he was dying, and died in the middle. As I said before, Constanza, his widow, was then so desperate for money that she employed one of his students, Sussmayer, to finish the piece and hand it off to the anonymous commissioner as Mozart's own work so that she would get the fee. We know now that that's not all quite true. There was an anonymous person who came to visit him and commissioned the Requiem. It was a servant of a Count von Walsegg who wanted to pass the work off as his own Requiem for the anniversary of his wife's death. She was young, she was only 24, who died the year before. He wanted to pass it off as his own piece of music for the anniversary of her death, which he did amazingly with the uncompleted version. Um, so because of this, all this mystery, and because of where we are in history, we're right on the cusp of Romanticism. We're about to get into the world of Schlegel and Hegel and Kant and Schopenhauer's around the corner in terms of philosophy. This story is just like made to measure for romantic, mysterious ideas of the other world. And because of all the controversy around the ending of it, it's led to this whole slew of literature. There's no piece of music that has as much written about it, because it's become this kind of romantic piece par excellence. And because the music is dark, there's very little Mozart that's written in a minor key. Happy music's major key, sad music's minor key. When Mozart writes in a minor key, you're in something really special. And most of the Requiem is in a minor key. So it has a dark, brooding atmosphere that's pretty unusual in Mozart. If you listen to Act One of The Marriage of Figaro, there's hardly a minor chord in the whole thing. I mean, you're kind of crying out for some dissonance because you're so sick of it all being so happy. But the Requiem is the complete opposite. Um, you mentioned before, was he influenced by other composers? And the answer to that is very much. He had played second violin in the first performance of Michael Haydn, not Joseph Haydn, the famous composer, but his brother Michael Haydn's Requiem Mass at Salzburg Cathedral. And he copied the structure of that piece pretty much exactly. He also loved Handel's motet, The Ways of Zion Do Mourn, from a text in Isaiah. And when composers of that period of time copy somebody else, it's not really, it's not really copyright theft. It was actually seen as a kind of honor to the previous composers and a sign of the composer's education that he knew the other music in the first place. So he's absolutely writing the Requiem in the context of music from the past, which is a new idea. People didn't like old music. Anything older than 20 years was not really, people weren't interested in older music until around the beginning of the 19th century. But he was deliberately writing in an old-fashioned style, in a church style, to give a sense of history. Um, and he was also quoting existing models of requiems and religious music to show how seriously he was taking the commission.
Okay. And just following up on that. So the Requiem is divided into passages or movements of
Hmm.
sorts. Okay.
Yep.
So how do these how do you think these passages how do they flow into the from the start to the finish?
Well, first of all, the idea of listening to the Requiem in a concert hall, one movement after another, is completely anachronistic. It's not what would have happened in Mozart's time at all. It would have been part of a Requiem Mass, which, remember, is not a funeral Mass. A Requiem Mass is not just for one person, it's for the dead in general. The closest thing we have in the Episcopal Church is All Souls Day, when we remember everybody who's ever died. When I was a treble on All Souls Day, the boys used to drop like flies because everybody who'd ever died in the parish, which went back to like 1500 and something, his or her name was read out. And it was a very long service. You had to take the day off school. So the movements would have fed into readings and liturgical aspects that are exactly the same in the Catholic and Orthodox Church today. You could slot all the bits in. So there's an introduction, a Requiem Aeternam, which is saying, let perpetual light shine upon them. There's a Kyrie, which is just exactly the way we have it. God have mercy, Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy. Then there's a sequence, which is a kind of end of the world story that begins with the Dies Irae, the day of wrath, day of judgment, when the earth will turn to ash. Tuba Mirum, when God appears with trumpets. Then Rex Tremendae, tremendous King of the universe. And then all the human stuff. Please remember me on that terrible day. Please let me not be one of the confused, confounded people. Let me never be confounded like the end of the Te Deum. The Lacrimosa, praying for the souls of the dead. And then from that point on, it basically becomes an ordinary mass. So we have a Hostias, which we would have in any ordinary mass, a Sanctus, a Benedictus, and Agnus Dei, just like we have every Sunday, although we don't sing them at St. John's, but the text is there. And then at the end, Lux Aeterna, which is the text from the very beginning, asking for perpetual light to shine upon the dead. And you've got to remember that these are Catholics, and they don't believe in salvation by grace alone. They believe that you have to work hard, and writing a requiem and praying for the dead and paying the church a big chunk of cash would have helped your time in purgatory and shortened your misery. So it was a very real exercise in piety, in the hope that your time after death would be a little bit less awful.
Okay, and then so help me understand this. Then so how does the Requiem differ from other Requiems that are they like, we're and I think you've done several. Do
Yeah.
they how do they compare? I guess is what I'm saying.
So Mozart's structure is pretty standard for an 18th century requiem. And one of the reasons why we're doing this particular version of the piece, which we'll have to talk about in a second, because there are lots of different completions of the requiem. One of the reasons why I like this completion the most is that it fleshes it out into the shape that would have been most expected of an 18th century requiem. There's no sense that Mozart was trying to be particularly innovative in the structure. It was a functional piece of music to do a job, and he was following an accepted pattern.
Okay. So that helps. So the mystery surrounding this piece of work, okay, which you've elaborated on, and then you talked about, Constanza needed the money and
Yep.
everything, and now you've talked that it was unfinished.
Yep.
So, and I believe I listened to the insights, which, by the way, everybody, you need to listen to these insights because they're really great. They're video presentations that Courtney does before the symphonies. And you alluded to the fact that several people have finished Mozart's and a lot over the years. So
Yep.
talk about that a little bit, Courtney.
Yep. Yep. So Mozart died in the middle of the Lacrimosa, and that's number 8 of 14 movements. I mean, literally, I have a score at home which has only the notes that he wrote, and it just stops. And there are whole bits like the Sanctus and the Benedictus and the Agnus Dei for which he wrote nothing more than a scrap of paper. So it had to be finished, as I said, to be functional. And um, Constanza chose Susmar because he'd been with Mozart the most towards the end of his life. She chose him to finish the piece. Um, and the version that we all know is the completion by Susmar. So there are lots of bits of it that are completely original composition, like not by Mozart, but everything is based on something that Mozart did. Unfortunately, Susmar was not a composer of Mozart's caliber. Nobody is. And he also was possibly not Mozart's best student. So in lots of the completions, there are lots of mistakes. There are lots of careless mistakes in terms of how the voice leading works and the instrumentation and things that you wouldn't pass a harmony degree exam with. So for musicians, we just cringe when we see these mistakes on the page. He did a really good job overall, but he would not have passed his fugue exam. Fugue is a very learned, complicated style of music, which is very common in church music, where it's like a round, like London's Burning, or I can't think what's a good American example of a round or
Row your boat.
row boat, exactly. It's like that, but 100 times harder. And Susmar just makes mistakes all over the place. Um, the problem is that if you don't do Susmar's version, that's the one everybody knows. So then everybody's like, oh, I didn't get my favorite bit, or I missed that part. So then we get a guy, Robert Levin, who's still alive. He's in his late 70s. Brilliant pianist and scholar who lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I used to know him when I lived there. Um, and he tries to make the best of both worlds. So he keeps the overall Susmar shape and the bits that everybody knows, but he fixes all the mistakes. And most importantly of all, he writes a movement that Susmar just couldn't be bothered to write because he was too busy. So the big shape of the Requiem, it's 14 different movements, but it actually divides up into 6 big chunks: an introit, a sequence, an offertorium, a sanctus, an agnus dei, and a communio. And each of those sections ends with a fugue, the complicated style that I was talking about. Except in the Susmar version, the Lacrimosa, which would have a fugue after it, does not end with a fugue because he ran out of time. And there's this very perfunctory little chord that's very disappointing. Mozart did actually write the tune of the fugue, he just didn't write the whole thing. So Levin, being he's the perfect person for this job because he's extremely pedantic and extremely complicated, exactly the right kind of architect to put this whole thing together. He takes the scrap of paper that Mozart wrote for the fugue and actually writes the whole thing, a brilliant fugue. So in this version of the Requiem, there is one whole movement of about 2 minutes, the Amen after the Lacrimosa, that you'll never have heard before. And that means that the whole thing is complete from a liturgical point of view. And I just find it so much more satisfying. Plus, all the ghastly mistakes are gone, and you can sigh a breath of fresh air. But you will not feel like you're hearing some version of the piece you don't know. It's the best of both worlds.
Okay. Why do you think in my research and looking at it, why do you think that this particular piece everyone mentions about Mozart? Why do you think it's probably one of the most cherished pieces of work? Because of someone that was, like you you were talking about, I mean, you were just blang, blang, blang coming out, consistently and beautiful. Figaro. I mean, we can go on and on and
Mhm.
on. Why does this one stick with everybody?
Well, a big part of it is that romantic story around the mystery of its composition. But it's also because it's the real deal in terms of, I mean, you feel like you're going through the drama of this. You really do feel like it, like when the choir sings Rex Tremendo Majestatis. I mean, you feel like you're seeing God in front of you. And I was saying to the chorus last night that they've got to portray God as at one point terrifying, this scary God, but then this intimate human God that we know, and the uniqueness of that in Christianity, of the accessibility of God because of our relationship with Jesus. And they have to be both those things all the time. It also it feels like it exists out of time. And I think that's one of the reasons why we keep coming back to it. It's it doesn't feel like it's written in 1791. It feels completely universal. And something about the style, the learned style that Mozart was trying to get to, the old-fashioned style that I was mentioning before, when he alludes to Michael Haydn and Handel, um, it sets it as a kind of culmination of centuries of religious music and learning. It's like the pinnacle of all those things. And it feels, I mean, I did it 3 times yesterday, and I mean, I feel like I've been hit by a bus, but it's just profound in a way that I don't think any other religious piece is. Um,
And they use it? They've used it a lot.
oh,
I mean, they
you
used it,
you
you
hear it all
know.
the time in commercials for everything from car insurance to Coca-Cola. But I mean, it's so well known that it's become a kind of calling card of Western culture. It's like the Sistine Chapel roof. It's just one of those things that stands as a pinnacle of human creation of art, and particularly in religious music.
Okay, and maybe you've answered this, but I really want you to kind of elaborate it on again. The message of the Requiem,
Yeah.
the about death and eternity, and kind of put that together in a musical form. I think you just referenced it in the previous answer. But if you could kind of just draw a picture of that, because that is what's profound to me about this piece.
Well, he does a great job of setting up the terror of the end of the world, but the final message is hopeful. I mean, it's the message of Christianity that we have a way out. Um, and the picture of God as huge and enormous, but also reachable, is is what leaves you. Um, the final movement, the final fugue of the whole thing, the Lux Aeterna, is the same music as the Kyrie was, except with the Lux Aeterna word instead of Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison. And there's something about that music which at the beginning was begging, because of course the Kyrie is really begging. That's why it's Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy again. That music coming back with the words of perpetual light will shine upon them is transformative, because the ultimate story of the piece,
Okay.
as bleak as it is,
Yeah.
as set in granite as it
Simply as it is.
is one of optimism and hope.
Do you think this is a big one? Do you think that Mozart during this time, and you've also kind of answered this question, but let's tie it up. Do you think that he changed the world of music kind of even as we know it today?
Oh, absolutely, no question. Yeah.
And
I mean, opera is unthinkable without Mozart. Um, Nobody ever written operas that long. No one ever had that kind of insight into the human mind. Um, but there'd never been that kind of ease in composition before. There'd never been that kind of universality that I was mentioning before, where even the most complex is graspable by the layperson on a first hearing. Um, Everybody wanted to be like Mozart. I mean, Beethoven spent his whole life studying everything. Brahms too. I mean, absolutely effortlessly huge genius. Um, and I really do think one of the examples of when you meet somebody who just, I mean, I think Kate's like this. You meet somebody who just feel like God is working through all the time. I think Mozart was like that in terms of music. It was the expression was so pure and so spontaneous that it can't come from anywhere else except a greater power.
You know, from what you said reminds me of the Edna St. Vincent Millay poem about my candle burns at both ends. It gives off a joyous light, that beautiful sense, and kind of represents Mozart just a little bit. Uh,
Mhm.
okay, now getting down to your position, the Requiem is a monumental endeavor. I look at you and you're exhausted. We can tell that.
I'm quite tired.
I mean, you've been at it. I mean, it's easy. By the way, he's in the bunker, y'all. We are absent. He's in his little bunker. So, he's taking a break here he's been rehearsing all morning. It is a monumental endeavor. So give us an example. What is the time frame for a production like this?
Yeah,
For you and for the orchestra, for the choir? I mean, you told Catherine and I at the beginning of this interview that you had just met the singers
yeah.
this morning. So they just fly in, do their thing, and fly out, right?
Yeah.
Give
So
us a
everybody's always
rundown.
quite surprised by how compressed the actual timeline of a professional concert is, because it's not like when you were in youth orchestra and you played the same program for the whole fall or the whole spring or whatever. So we decided to do this piece a couple of years ago. So for example, I've just finished planning the year after next. So all of next season has been done for ages, and we've just finished the year after that. So that's how far ahead we are because of guest artist schedules, and there's so many things to coordinate putting a concert together. I sometimes wonder how it ever happens at all. Um, I'd put this piece off for years because I was too scared of how hard it is stylistically. Mozart is so easy sounding, but that makes it so difficult because there's nowhere to hide and you have to be crystal clear in your intentions. And I find that when you don't want to do a piece for a long time, it comes knocking eventually and says, "Okay, you're ready to do me now." And that was about 2 years ago. So I spent a lot of time researching which edition, which completion I wanted to do. And then we book all the singers. I listen to the quartet, listen to their videos, maybe go and audition them somewhere else. The chorus starts learning the piece in September, so they've been at it for weeks. The musicians get their music 3 weeks before the concert week begins, but the first time that we actually rehearse is Tuesday. So we rehearsed on Tuesday. In the morning, we played the concerto with the two soloists, and we played the Requiem for about an hour without chorus. Then on Tuesday night, I had just the chorus for the first time with the piano, sang through the whole thing, and they'd been preparing what I wanted to do, but there's still a lot that's new and that they hadn't got ready. Then last night was Wednesday. We had everybody together without the soloist. So yes, we had the whole chorus and orchestra yesterday for 2.5 hours last night. Did the whole piece without the soloists. Then I met the soloists this morning for a piano rehearsal for their bits. At 2 o'clock today, I'm meeting the orchestra and the soloist for their bits only without the chorus. And then tonight we are doing the whole Requiem with everybody and the concerto. And then we have the first concert on Friday. So the point is all the preparation by everybody is done before we start. That's the key point. Everybody has to show up ready. And that was one of the things that I had to change culturally here when I became music director because it was not always the case before. And we had to really change our working culture. Once the week begins, there is no time to be learning the notes. You've got to be ready weeks and weeks before. Um, so a lot of the iceberg is hidden and goes on in musicians' studios as they practice by themselves. But the actual putting it all together happens at breakneck speed at the very end.
Do you hire other than the professional singers?
Mhm.
I mean, do you hire extra musicians for it, or do you use, or is this the regular symphony?
So the Jacksonville Symphony employs 60 full-time musicians, and that's up from 50 when I joined 10 years ago. But really, we need it to be 75, 80. So that's part of our 5-year plan. So usually when we perform a classical concert, that the series that I conduct, the orchestra is at about 75 or 80. So that means we hire 15 to 20 extras, as we call them, musicians. But the Mozart Requiem isn't for a huge orchestra. It doesn't have any flutes or oboes. It's got basset horns, which are huge, big clarinets, brand new. Mozart loved the clarinet, fell in love with it late in life. It was a brand new instrument. Bassoons, two horns, two trumpets, drums, and strings. So there are very few extras this week in the orchestra.
In Mozart's time, okay, when this
Mhm.
was developed, what did the orchestra look like? Was it similar to this?
Good question. So in Mozart's time, the strings were always the same. There were always violins, violas, cellos, and basses. Sometimes there were loads of them. Sometimes there were very, very few. There was no kind of standardization. But in the winds and brass, nowadays we have two flutes, two oboes, two bassoons, two clarinets, four horns, three trumpets, a trombone section, timpani. In Mozart's time, that was much less standardized. So in the piano concertos, for example, sometimes you'll use flutes and oboes and no clarinets. Sometimes you use clarinets and bassoons but no flutes. It was much more flexible, and it would depend on what he had because he was always writing for a specific occasion. He never wrote just for the hell of it. It was always for a concert with specific resources in mind. Um, so you don't really get the orchestra being completely standardized until you get to Beethoven's time. And you never get trombones in the orchestra and apart from in religious music until after Beethoven. So the fact that there are trombones in this performance is simply because the trombone was a church instrument, as we know from the Psalms. Sackbuts are all over the place in David's time. Um, they were only used in religious music. You don't get trombones in a symphony until Beethoven's fifth, and that's uh, uh, 13 years away from the Requiem.
Okay, for all of you that are going to play Jeopardy, that's probably the $2,000 question right there. Concert question. Okay, so we're all, thank you for providing 30 tickets for us
My
because,
pleasure.
we filled them out. For those of us that are coming Saturday night,
Uh-huh.
okay, we need some advice from the
Okay.
maestro here for the listeners to the Requiem as to how do we really get into this is one way to enjoy it. And I believe in this as a public school teacher. I believe that the more you know, the better off you are to provide that. But how can we really, taking what you are giving us today, which thank you very much, and to enjoy our experience, such as the instruments, like you were talking about, maybe what to look for there, or pivotal moments to look for, because this is such an emotional, I think, and you've talked about that it's such an emotional situation. How do we arrive for this?
Well, I think the answer is really easy, and that is to listen to the piece before you come to the concert. People often say, I don't know how you hear what's wrong with the orchestra, or I don't know how you compare different tempi, and the answer is because I've listened to 500 recordings of the Mozart Requiem 1,000 times each. So listen to a recording. Um, Classical music is not your friend if you're hearing the music for the first time in the concert. For example, how many of you ever liked an album of pop music the first time you listened to it? Never. If you like it the first time, it's probably not very good because you get bored of it the second time. But classical music rewards knowing the music really, really well. So I would suggest listening to a recording. If you want to know the recording that I like the most, it is by a French Canadian conductor called Bernard Labadie with an orchestra called Les Violons de Roy, the Violins of Roy, based in Quebec. And that's available on Spotify or Tidal or whatever you use for music for free. And he performs the same completion that we are playing this week, the Robert Levin. I'll send you the details of that recording in an email so you
That'd
can
be
forward
great.
it to everybody. But the number one way to get more out of the concert is to listen to the music before you come to the concert.
And what's your favorite thing in when we're looking, we can see you from the back, okay? Okay, and can't see your face, okay? But when you're doing this, what just pulls you and just say, oh God, I can't believe I'm doing it.
Um,
What section? Is there any particular section?
yeah, there are, I mean, there are lots. Um, But let me see. One of the parts that really blows my mind is I alluded to it earlier, the Rex Tremendo. The, um, the way Mozart sets Rex Tremendum Majestatis, I mean, it feels like you're looking at God. Um, and also, I think it's just the fact that he takes something abstract and makes it really dramatic, and you feel like you're living it. Um, there are lots of things that give me pleasure, like when the orchestra plays the way I've asked them to, and when the chorus sings with consonants that are loud enough so you can actually hear the words. There are lots of things that give me pleasure. The soloist quartet is absolutely stunning. I mean, really, the soprano and the tenor are, well, they're all great, but the tenor is really, really good. So the joy of excellent music making always gives me great pleasure. And um, something that I really appreciate here now is that the orchestra plays really well all the time, and they play stylishly all the time. And every single time I go and guest conduct anywhere else, I think, I'd rather be at home. And that is not the way it was 10 years ago. So the quality of the orchestra gives me great pleasure.
Well, just as a personal aside, Grady and I were privileged to be at your kind of audition 14 years ago.
Hmm.
And I mean, we watched all of them that came in to supposedly audition for this job. So
Yeah.
glad you got it. Okay,
That week just felt like everything was right.
I
So,
know.
yeah.
Okay, now you've given us this, but before the Requiem, we've got a few minutes. And
Yep.
I told you I'd have you done by one. Okay, we've got a few minutes. Um, could you give us, as I said before to everybody, you do a video production of insights, what you call, I believe what y'all call insights, and it's excellent.
And those
Uh,
are all on the Jacksonville Symphony website if anybody
Right.
wants to put them.
Right. It's on the symphony website. Everybody go there and look at the insight that he did today because you'll really enjoy it now because you've got this great background. Tell us or give us kind of an overview because we focus basically on the Requiem. And
Hmm.
by the way, this is the one when we talked to Courtney and Catherine first, trapped him in the bookstore and wouldn't let him out. Said, okay, all right, now you're a member and you've got to do this. All right. When we trapped him and got him to agree to this interview, this was the one that he recommended for us to see. But there's also a really terrific thing that happens as a prelude
Yeah.
before, and is it Sinfonia? Is that how you say it?
Sinfonia Concertante, which literally means symphony concerto.
Can you
And
kind of an overview?
yep. So it's the piece that made Mozart really sick of the Archbishop in Salzburg. It was this piece that he got in trouble over. This piece that he shouldn't have been writing that resulted in his resignation and his exit to Vienna. So it's important. It's K364. Yeah, 364. So it's a concerto for two soloists, a violin and a viola. And in this performance, the violin solo is our concertmaster, Adalia Nartadjeva, and the viola is our principal viola, Yunting Kuo. And it's basically a concerto for two soloists. Um, but it's one of his best. Mozart thrives on dramatic contrast. So the piano concertos are some of his best music because you got the piano versus the orchestra. Sorry, testing. The operas are his best music because you've got all the singers interacting with each other. So he always thrives on contrast. When he doesn't have contrast, like in the symphonies, not quite his best music, I would argue. And sometimes in the violin concertos, not quite top drawer either. But here we've got two soloists, violin and viola. So we've got drama again. So he's back in his absolute peak dramatic situation. So it's one of his best concertos. I think it's the best violin concerto, which always upsets violinists because it's actually for viola as well. Um, it's like a conversation between two soloists and the orchestra. Three movements, standard, fast, slow, fast. The first movement, E flat major, regal and wonderful. E flat major special because there are three flats in B flat, in E flat major, B flat, E flat, and A flat, one for each member of the Trinity. Always a special key with religious significance because of that signifier. big, joyous, tremendous first movement, then a minor key slow movement. Remember, I said when Mozart writes in a minor key, special things happen. So one of his most profound slow movements, and then a presto as fast as possible finale, which is just like bottled joy. I mean, it just sort of like fizzing. So it's a really good piece. It's not just a kind of opening the concert. It's a really good thing in itself. So I think you'll really enjoy it. And also, Adelia and Yunting are amazing. So it's
Definitely.
really nice to play with them. Yeah.
Well, this has been great. And so that we've got you cornered in the bunker. All right. So you can't get out. Tell us, can you give us maybe, I know, of course, we talked about the insights, and I know that a friend of mine attended a lecture that y'all had. Was it last night?
Yes, one of my friends,
How do you
one of my
find out about stuff like that? I mean, she was just blown away with that.
well,
And
as soon as you put your name into the ticket base, now you might have to request it because this ticket went through. We don't have all of y'all's
gotcha.
information individually. But as soon as you spend any money or donate anything to the symphony, you're in the database and you'll get emails about everything.
Okay, good, because she said it was wonderful. Absolutely
Yeah, it
wonderful.
was. It was a friend of mine who's a professor of musicology at St. John's Community College, and he's a Mozart expert. And he gave a presentation about the piece and the versions and the history and all these kinds of things.
That was outstanding. So now that we've got you cornered, and since we're your really deep personal friends, okay, can you tell us give us kind of a heads up about the rest of the season and
Yes,
also maybe a little snippet about what's to come next year?
yes. So this year has been our 75th season since the orchestra was founded.
Wow.
So it's been a big celebration. And as you probably know, we're in a big fundraising thing to improve the acoustics in the hall, build a new donor lounge, have more musicians. Um, and we've raised huge amounts of money in the last couple of weeks. In the last 2.5 months, the Jacksonville Symphony has raised $25 million. So we're on a roll in terms of fundraising. But what it means is that this year, every single concert would have been the pinnacle of any other season. But this year, there's just one after another. So we are all very happy and very excited and absolutely exhausted at this point because every single concert has been massive. And this is just another example. Um, so planning next year has been really hard because we didn't want it to be like an anticlimax. So remaining this year, after this concert, the final classical concert of the season is with me on June 6th and 7th. And that is a brand new piece by Carlos Simon, the wonderful African-American composer whose music draws together jazz and a lot of Baptist spiritual stuff because his dad's a Baptist pastor. A brand new piece for Jacksonville, which is called each movement is based on star signs. It's called Zodiac. Uh, and then we play Gershwin, An American in Paris, popular favorite. And we end with Aaron Copland's Third Symphony, which is the symphony that he based on the Fanfare for the Common Man, which I'm sure you all will recognize. That's the end of this season. Then we all hibernate for 2 months. And then in September, we start next year. And the big highlights of next year are opera comes back. We're playing Tosca in one of our special stage productions in Jacoby Hall where we have a set built on the stage and the singers are in front behind the orchestra like a real opera house. Um, we're playing Bruckner's Eighth Symphony, which is a big spiritual thing that we should talk about. That's another massively important God piece. Beethoven's Fifth is there. Conrad Tao, our artist in residence, comes back with the rest of his piano trio to play the Beethoven Triple. There are two new pieces, including a world premiere by Anna Klein, wonderful English composer, which I'm very excited about. Um, and there's loads of stuff in terms of pops and movies. And the season has been released. So if you go to the website when you're looking at Insight, you can also download a PDF of the whole season brochure of next year. And there's a lot of really exciting stuff. It's one of my favorite points in the year when all the scores arrive for next year and I take all of the friends off the shelf that are going to accompany me through the next 12 months. And I just did that this week. So a lot to look forward to next year.
Well, you kind of this led into one of your statements that you just said led into something that maybe, since we've got you cornered, well, maybe next year with Brickner, you might want to come back and visit with us again.
Of course, I'd be happy to. Yep.
Good. Because that is, oh, that's perfect. It's perfect for what we do in the cathedral, Courtney. It really is. It's perfect for what. So I hate to let this go, but look at you. I know you've got at 2 o'clock, and I told you, I promised you I'd have you about at 1, I've almost done that. We've got 3 minutes.
That's perfect.
Is there anything in your repertoire that you haven't done that you would just love to do, and it's in the back of your mind that, oh God, this is it. If I can get the orchestra, and if I can get the right time, the perfect storm, if I had this, what would I do? What would it be?
Well, there are lots of pieces that I've saved for years because I didn't feel like the orchestra was ready for them yet, and the Bruckner next year is one of those. So we couldn't really have played it before. So that's absolutely one. There's lots of opera that I haven't conducted. I'm a big, big Wagnerite, and I love The Ring, and I would love to do bits of that. Yeah, mostly opera stuff. There's also a lot of, I grew up singing in a choir, so I know all these masses and religious music really, really well. And I'm starting to conduct them more with other orchestras. So next year I'm going to the Warsaw Philharmonic for the first time, really good orchestra in Poland. And we're doing the Schubert A flat major mass, his third mass, which I've known for years and which I'm looking forward to. So it's always the things that I haven't done yet are the expensive things that require 100 people. And that's part of why we're raising $50 million.
Okay, well, I hope it's complete, and we are so looking forward to Saturday night, and thank you again for your generosity. And everybody, let's all clap. It was
Thank
just
you.
wonderful.
And just one more thing, please do ask the ushers to show you back to my dressing room, to this room after the concert on Saturday night so I can say hello.
Oh, thank you. We will. Thank you so much. And maybe we'll put a little bottle of bubbly in under the
Sounds good.
okay. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you so
It's
much.
my pleasure. See you all on Saturday.
Bye-bye. And thank you
Bye.
everybody for coming. This was wonderful.
Bye.
Bye-bye.